Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, Guy had shown overwhelming power and forced Ivarage into constant retreat, even awakening the ultimate skill, Lord of Wisdom. Ivarage still couldn't shake Guy's advantage. The reason was simple. After witnessing Rimuru successfully use Alteration on Velzard, Guy had already evolved his ultimate skill, Lord of Pride, Lucifer into the third god-level ultimate skill in the entire series, God of Abyss, Nodens. And in the final moment, Guy even combined the strongest attacks from Milim, Velzard, Velgrind, and Veldora. With his ultimate strike, Catastrophe Eclipse, he rewrote the world laws set by Veldanava, carved cracks into Heaven Tower itself, and completely shattered Ivarage arrogance and confidence. In this episode, we finally saw Rimuru's first direct clash with Veldanava, and we also learned what truly stood behind Veldanava's insane decision to destroy the world. So, let's get started. Rimuru watched Veldanava with full caution. In one motion, Veldanava instantly summoned the corpses of 3 cryptids generals that had already been defeated far away, Kakeashi, Habataki, and Suyemu, and forced them upright. This didn't look like Luminous's resurrection. These bodies were still just empty shells, unconscious and hollow. But Rimuru didn't relax. If anything, he became even more alert. Because under Holy Field, a zone that suppressed magicules, being able to retrieve corpses from across distance and repair them instantly, that alone was a divine feat that rivaled, if not surpassed, what Luminous could do. Rimuru instinctively knew he couldn't strike recklessly. Normally, revived beings came back weaker, but these 3 had been top-tier cryptids even at baseline, and if Veldanava was moving, he wouldn't be doing anything pointless. Rimuru could sense it clearly. Anything Luminous could do, the Creator God had no reason not to do, and every reason to do it better. And sure enough, Veldanava calmly declared that the physical containers were ready. Then 3 pale blue-white spheres of light formed in his palm, and with almost gentle care, he pressed them into the bodies. Seal immediately confirmed interference with space-time and inferred the truth. Veldanava had summoned souls from other timelines, souls carrying overwhelming will. Rimuru understood instantly. Veldanava hadn't restored the monster's original souls. He had stuffed other powerful souls into these vessels. He called it summoning of resentment. And unlike Masayuki's Einherjar, which were basically memory-based reconstructions, digital echoes, Veldanava's method was outright cheating. He directly interfered with past, present, or future, reached into the instant before a powerful being's complete death and soul dispersal, and forcibly stole the real, authentic soul from that moment. Rimuru felt his spine go cold. Authority that could meddle with any point in time like that was beyond unfair. It was illegal. Well, technically Rimuru could do the same thing. He just never tried. Back to the story, if he could do this freely, then the very concept of death meant nothing in front of Veldanava. And that contradiction forced Rimuru to ask the most fundamental question. If Veldanava could do so, then why didn't he revive his wife, Lucia? Because yes, if Veldanava truly had this level of control, he should have been able to reach into a timeline where Lucia hadn't died yet and retrieve her soul directly. Normally, disturbing the dead was taboo. But in Rimuru's logic, if someone died with regrets, like Sheon back then, revival could be justified. And more importantly, if losing a loved one was truly the reason to erase the entire world, then, whether it was taboo or not, revival should have been the first and only answer. But Veldanava hadn't revived Lucia for one simple reason, not because Lucia refused, but because Veldanava couldn't find her soul at all. Ciel went strangely silent at this time, and even though the reason wasn't hard to guess, Rimuru didn't actually know the truth. So he tried to talk Veldanava down with logic. If Lucia's soul couldn't be found, then maybe she had already reincarnated. And if Veldanava destroyed the world now, what if he accidentally killed her reincarnated self? That would be recklessness on a cosmic scale. Rimuru genuinely wanted to avoid war. He tried to make Veldanava hesitate, but Veldanava's will didn't budge, and his answer was pure despair. If he couldn't find Lucia's soul, then destroying the world actually increased the odds of finding her. His reasoning was terrifyingly calm. He still had his daughter Milim, and he had Ivarage as a substitute container for Lucia. If he destroyed the world, everything would be reduced back to the most fundamental infon. Then, over an immense span of time, he could collect and analyze all infon, reconstruct Lucia's data, and ultimately overwrite Ivarage into becoming the real Lucia. It was an extreme method. So extreme, Rimuru almost couldn't believe Veldanava would go that far for love. But in theory, it was possible. And when the one proposing it was the creator god himself, possible stopped being a joke. At that point, persuasion was dead. Negotiation collapsed, and only battle remained. Rimuru couldn't find any words that would truly convince Veldanava, and he couldn't hide behind vague moral arguments like Lucia wouldn't want this, because Rimuru didn't know what Lucia would want. He hesitated, and then Seal suddenly became aggressively decisive and suggested Rimuru-sama to defeat Veldanava. Rimuru was genuinely stunned. That was the creator god, but Seal spoke with absolute confidence, saying that with Rimuru's current power, it would be easy, and that sometimes stopping someone by force was its own form of kindness. Rimuru complained internally about how fired up Seal sounded, but he understood the logic. Just like stopping Milim's stampede back then, if someone was blinded by grief and would regret it later, then defeating and restraining them could be mercy. Veldanava was no longer thinking clearly. Rimuru decided he would force him to calm down by beating him down. And honestly, there was one upside. With Veldanava in this completely unhinged state, Rimuru no longer needed to worry about a loyalist's flipping sides. The battlefield had clarified itself. Now it was simple. Stop the creator god no matter what it took. At the same time, Rimuru became even more convinced that Veldanava had completely lost his sanity, because the 3 souls he revived just happened to be the top 3 villains in the history of the most irredeemable scum ranking. Seal quickly confirmed their identities. The first was the great sorcerer Jahil, the source of Kagali's tragedy, the idiot who once summoned Gi. And as we've mentioned before, he was also the man who killed Veldanava and Lucia, the one who drove Milim into rampage and pushed her down the path of becoming a demon lord. Almost every major calamity in this world could somehow be traced back to him. He had just been defeated by Yuki, only to be forcefully revived again and dragged back to work. All things considered, Rimuru felt that Jahil's bad luck was almost impressive. And honestly, reviving the very man who murdered himself and his wife was the clearest possible proof that Veldanava was completely out of control. The second soul was Cornu, one of the 3 mystic admirals. He had appeared during the Imperial War and was promptly burned to ashes by Velgrind. Rimuru had never fought him personally, but he knew enough to understand that Cornu was nothing but trouble. The third was that endlessly persistent, cockroach-tier villain, the criminal Vega. Even Seal showed open hostility toward him, remarking that he should have been buried properly from the very beginning, and that exiling him to the end of space-time had been far too merciful. Rimuru suddenly remembered that when he returned from the end of space-time to this point in history, he had collided with something along the way. Now he was pretty sure that something had been Vega. Rimuru immediately reassigned combat roles. First, Benimaru continued as overall commander, ready to join the fight if things went critical. Next, Diablo, despite being heavily injured, took on the interception role. With his usual cold efficiency, he dragged the barely conscious Feldway away to serve as forced labor. Rimuru felt a bit sorry for Feldway in his heart, but at the same time, he silently cheered him on. Watching Diablo and Feldway disappear into the distance, Zelario seemed to fall into hesitation once again. In the end, however, he chose to remain behind and observe, apparently wanting to witness the battle between Veldanava-sama and Rimuru with his own eyes. Dino, Pico, and Gracia also chose to stay and watch. After all, Veldanava was their creator and their master. That said, Rimuru strongly suspected Dino just wanted an excuse to slack off. In sharp contrast to the Seraphim, the three primordial demon beauties were overflowing with fighting spirit. After drinking the special recovery potions and acquiring slime cells, their morale was sky high. They swore to crush the enemy's soul. Carrera, in particular, was visibly hyped. At that moment, Masayuki stood up, but the tone of his voice changed completely. It was Rudra. He had caught the nauseating stench of desire clinging to Jahil and immediately deduced the truth. Jahil was the reincarnation of that petty king from a minor nation, the very man who had killed Veldanava and Lucia long ago, and then killed by Dino. Rudra declared that he would personally settle accounts with this great calamity, bringing the long-standing tragedy to a definitive end. Yuki also teleported in, volunteering to provide support using anti-skill and instant motion to assist Rudra. For all his carelessness, in a situation like this, he was actually a reliable ally. As for Masayuki himself, Rimuru occasionally caught glimpses of Masayuki's own consciousness screaming. Felt like saying he was going to die from sheer terror under Rudra's overwhelming presence. But Rimuru decided to ignore that detail for now. Velgrind also seemed ready to assist, which allowed Rimuru to finally pull his focus away from the three resurrected assholes. For survival, for protection, and for that lost friend whom everyone had failed to reach, Rimuru resolved to give everything he had and face the Creator God head-on. Rimuru and Veldanava faced each other at the center of the battlefield, forming a true one-on-one duel. Against the Creator God who insisted on destroying the world, Rimuru drew his blade and declared that he wasn't fighting to slay a god. He was fighting to beat Veldanava back into sanity. Veldanava found this amusing and accepted the challenge. Rimuru launched forward in an Ei Jutsu stance. In the instant he swung, he realized that the Drago Blade, forged by Kurobe, had undergone a qualitative change. The once pitch-black blade now shimmered with dazzling rainbow patterns along its edge. The effect far exceeded expectations. Veldanava attempted to block with a sword formed from condensed aura, but that aura blade was sliced clean through, like butter. Forced to retreat, Veldanava escaped via instant motion, wearing a rare expression of surprise. He remarked that although Rimuru's sword hadn't been created by him, it clearly possessed Genesis-level power. Rimuru didn't really understand what Genesis-level meant, but he proudly credited Kurobe's craftsmanship anyway. From this exchange alone, everyone could objectively gauge Rimuru's strength. Feldway, even while wielding a Genesis-grade weapon himself, had been utterly incapable of breaking through Veldanava's aura blade. The gap was enormous. Realizing aura weapons wouldn't suffice, Veldanava decided to get serious. Rimuru chose to observe, partly because he still hoped Veldanava might regain his reason, and partly because he needed to stall for time until Guy and the others could arrive. It might not have been the best plan, but it was the best option available. Veldanava clasped his hands and murmured. Then a long sword manifested, wrapped in crystalline, bubble-like light. To Rimuru, the visual effect looked like the bubbles rising and popping in a bottle of Ramoon soda, surreal and almost whimsical. The sword was called Memory. It was the 8th Genesis-grade weapon forged by Veldanava after his resurrection, recording the entire history of 3,000 great worlds, including the Central World. Rimuru instantly understood. This was essentially the physical embodiment of the Akashic Records. Facing a divine sword radiating pressure rivaling that of a true dragon, Rimuru couldn't help worrying whether his own blade would snap. Seal, however, calmly stated that it should be fine. During a brief pause, Veldanava asked for the name of Rimuru's sword. Rimuru realized that calling it Drago Blade felt far too casual for a final battle like this. He decided to give it a proper name. He declared loudly, Elpis, aka Hope. The name carried Rimuru's greed and his prayer, hope that the world wouldn't be destroyed, and the desire that everything would somehow turn out fine. The moment he named it, Rimuru felt an unexplained wave of exhaustion, as if a tremendous amount of energy had been consumed. That kind of fatigue usually occurred only when naming beings of a higher order. Seal immediately intervened, reporting that Rimuru-sama's physical condition was perfectly normal, and there was nothing to worry about. Trusting Seal completely, Rimuru dismissed it as his imagination. Both sides were ready. Veldanava praised the name Elpis, then his gaze sharpened, signaling the start of battle. The instant their blades collided, space itself tore apart, forming a severance field capable of cutting down anything that entered it. This was combat on a level far beyond what ordinary heroes could even approach. Even Benimaru had to retreat to a safe distance. Everyone nearby shouted in panic, ordering a full withdrawal to avoid being instantly erased by the aftershocks. Within that domain, where no one else could intervene, Rimuru and Veldanava poured their will, their convictions, and their fate into their blades, clashing in a duel that would decide the survival of the world itself. Let's briefly shift our perspective back to Ivarage's battlefield. After enduring the combined ultimate strikes of Gi and 4 true dragon-class powerhouses, Ivarage staggered back to her feet, carried by a torrent of raw emotion. Not only had she survived, she unleashed destruction beams far more powerful than anything she had shown before. The scale of devastation shattered all common sense. Several above-ground layers of Heaven Tower were blown apart in an instant. Stones scattered, entire sections collapsed, and then vanished altogether. The tower was split cleanly in two, one half still anchored to the earth, the other remaining as a floating upper structure. The giant race, who had lived here for generations, watched in despair, unable to believe that their eternal symbol had fallen. Yes, this was something that should have been impossible, for Heaven Tower had always symbolized unbreakability, protected by divine blessings and absolute defense. Yet, that absolute truth had now been broken. The reason lay in Gi's earlier ultimate technique, Catastrophe Eclipse. That attack had not only gravely wounded Ivarage, but its after effects had interfered with and mutated the tower's inherent unbreakability property. This alone served as undeniable proof that Gi had already shattered the world laws established by Veldanava. Even Gi's side was thrown into disarray by the indiscriminate blast. Amid the chaos, Gi expressed dissatisfaction with Veldora's defensive performance. Veldora tried to argue that he had done his best. After all, most of his opponents never survived long enough to require defense, and he wasn't exactly the type to train defensive scenarios every day. That excuse earned him a sharp glare from his sister, Velzard, who coldly questioned how he dared to talk back to Gi. Veldora instantly backed down, painfully reminded of the brutal reality of little brothers have no rights. Fortunately, Velgrind, in order to protect Masayuki, decisively dismissed her parallel existence, clearly uninterested in watching Velzard endlessly hype up her man. By this point, however, Veldora had learned an important survival skill from years of dealing with Rimuru, blame deflection. He promptly shifted the focus and accused Milim of not fighting seriously, which, to be fair, wasn't wrong. Compared to her stampede state, Milim was vastly weaker. Milim protested tearfully, insisting she really was giving it her all. Gi, however, showed her no mercy. He bluntly pointed out that Milim was holding back. She hadn't activated ultimate skill Lord of Wraith. Milim couldn't deny it. Her hesitation came from good intentions. If she went berserk again, the consequences would be catastrophic. But in response to Milim's doubt, Gi displayed the absolute authority of the oldest demon lord. He firmly believed Milim could control her ultimate skill through sheer willpower. The reason was simple. Gi had fully understood the mechanics of Lord of Wraith and could even replicate it himself. In the past, he had limited output to 40% for safety, but now, with God of Abyss, he could safely push it to 90%. And if it was Milim herself, Gi had complete confidence in her ability to handle her power. He told her to use it without fear. If she lost control again, he and everyone present would restrain her. Feeling that trust, Milim made her decision and reactivated Lord of Wraith. Her power skyrocketed instantly, her magicule count entering infinite amplification. Veldora, meanwhile, trembled in terror. If Milim went berserk again, he'd be forced to help suppress her, and would absolutely get blamed by Rimuru afterward. Even though he'd done nothing wrong, he knew full well he'd somehow be held responsible. Especially with an older sister who would defend her man at all costs. Veldora bitterly joked to himself that he'd apparently unlocked the ability to predict the future, the dark future for sure. Just as the four regrouped and prepared to re-engage, Ivarage suddenly stopped attacking. She stood motionless, staring beyond the collapsed wall of Heaven Tower. In the distance, Veldanava was descending from the sky, locked in battle with Rimuru. Ivarage murmured to herself, whispering over and over again the sentence, "Half, my other half." She seemed to sense some form of resonance coming from Veldanava. Ignoring Guy and the others entirely, Ivarage flew straight toward Veldanava and Rimuru. The four felt both humiliated and alarmed. Under no circumstances could they allow that monster to interfere with Rimuru's battle. Veldora complained that if Ivarage disrupted Rimuru, he'd definitely get charged with an extra crime. Thus, the strongest quartet gave chase, rushing toward the final battlefield. All fronts finally converged. By now, the entire eastern battlefield had been reduced to scorched earth by Ivarage's rampage. At the heart of this devastation, the Holy Knights maintaining the anchors of the Holy Field stood on the brink of death. Nicholas, Arnaud, and the others fought desperately to hold the formation. Rimuru noticed them. Though they had avoided direct combat, every clash between Rimuru and Veldanava triggered shockwaves like atmospheric explosions. These pure energy collisions devastated the surroundings. Every aftershock was a lethal trial for even distant elites. At the main battlefield, Rimuru himself was struggling. First, defensive collapse. Veldanava's sword techniques were too sharp, carrying overwhelming energy. Rimuru's fully deployed multilayer barriers were shattered in a single blow, forcing him to rebuild them again and again. Second, speed suppression. Veldanava was absurdly fast. Even Rimuru's prized future attack prediction was rendered useless. He couldn't anticipate or evade in time. Just as Rimuru was being pushed back, Chloe's voice echoed through thought communication, urgently telling him to dodge right. Rimuru obeyed instantly, narrowly avoiding a Godspeed strike. Facing Veldanava's puzzled expression, Rimuru calmly pretended he'd dodged through his own skill. With Chloe's near-spoiler-level guidance, Rimuru finally stabilized the situation. He stopped hard-blocking attacks that caused explosions, and instead redirected force through flowing deflections. But just as Rimuru thought he had regained control, disaster struck. A thunderous crash echoed. The upper levels of Heaven Tower collapsed again. Arnaud nearly fell, barely avoiding the collapse thanks to his position. The barrier was maintained by the slimmest margin. Rimuru silently thanked fate for that narrow escape. From the rubble, Ivarage, wearing Lucia's face, burst forth, charging straight towards the battlefield of Rimuru and Veldanava. Rimuru wondered which of them she was targeting. But Chloe delivered a chilling answer. Ivarage's target was Veldanava. It wasn't a prediction, it was a statement of an unavoidable tragedy. Ivarage roared and laughed maniacally, declaring Veldanava to be hers alone as she lunged at the Creator God. But everything unfolded exactly as Veldanava intended. He smoothly drove the divine sword memory into Ivarage's chest and slammed her into the ground. Energy rivaling that of a dragon type erupted from the blade, completely sealing her movements. Seal immediately analyzed the situation, reporting that memory appeared capable of implanting past memories into its target. Guy instantly saw through the plan and demanded to know whether Veldanava intended to implant Lucia's memories into this body. Veldanava admitted it. Unable to find Lucia's soul, he had chosen to recreate her. The method was brutally simple. Use Ivarage as a vessel, implant Lucia's personality and memories via the sword memory, then destroy the world and collect all scattered infon to reconstruct her soul. Faced with this insane plan of annihilating the world just to create a person, Guy activated full mockery mode. He sneered that he'd always known Veldanava was an idiot, and resurrection had only made him worse. He even broadened the insult, declaring that the entire true dragon race was made up of selfish fools. This collateral damage left Velzard and Veldora visibly uncomfortable. Velzard hastily argued that she was clearly brilliant, and shouldn't be lumped in with such an incompetent relative. Veldora countered that the most boiled one was obviously Milim. Before Rimuru could even comment, Guy cut them off, stating that Veldora and Milim were equally hopeless. Rimuru silently nodded in agreement. At last, all top-tier forces had gathered. The split battlefield merged into one, and the true confrontation between Rimuru and Veldanava was only just beginning. Alright, that's all for this video. By the end of this episode, our understanding of Veldanava had deepened once more. His drastic personality change after resurrection was real. The flaw in true dragon immortality was real. But what truly drove him mad was his inability to revive Lucia. In that sense, Veldanava, Velzard, and Velgrin were all hopeless romantics. From Veldanava's perspective, it almost makes sense. Imagine being a creator god who can access information across all time and space within a closed system, only to discover that the single most important piece of data has vanished entirely, unrecoverable, nowhere to be found. That alone would drive anyone with even mild obsessive tendencies completely insane. System reset suddenly starts sounding reasonable. Seal, of course, remained as composed as ever. In her view, Rimuru-sama's victory rate was 100%. She simply preferred a gentler solution, one that would allow the creator god to release his obsession without relying purely on force. As for why Lucia's soul fragments could not be found in any timeline, there's no need to overthink it. The answer is obviously tied to Seal. What truly makes Veldanava more terrifying than any other opponent is this. His actions directly target the soul itself, ignoring all conventional rules. In our next episode, Rimuru will become the target of soul extraction, and he will face the greatest trial of his entire life. The next episode would be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.